So, what I am looking to talk to you guys about is a very interesting story that came out of a Russian newspaper today, or a Russian article today. So, if I can just find it in the Telegram. It was a bit up. Oh, archive, yes. Translate English, but if this is showing up on it should be showing up on stream. Is this the correct article? Yes. So, a very interesting Russian internet article came up today from the name hasn't anglicized. Uh, all this. Well, the journalist's name, Maria Pavlova. I love Pavlova. It's a very, very good. I was meant to translate that into English. Let me just apologies. I can't read Cyrillic. I think this is like the Kommersant media outlet. Just for my due diligence. No, not Kommersant. Onto something else. Why isn't that anglicizing? Okay, this is a bit boomerish. I will fix this up for the YouTube channel so it runs a bit more smoother and is easy to follow. In the Telegram. Script kp.ru. Let's just go to that, see if they allow us to anglicize. Okay. Special operation. Okay, forget it. Like I say, I'll cut this all out whenever I come to doing the YouTube video. But for those interested, this is the website of this particular outlet. I should really have done my due diligence and checked the name. I'm not too sure if this is a state-run media outlet. I think it's not. I think from the looks of it, it looks a bit more like a kind of tabloidy, sort of Daily Mailish kind of Russian news outlet. So certainly toes the Kremlin line, but I don't believe that this particular outlet is actually run by the state. But either way, today was this today? Yes, well, I guess 2 days ago now, where I am. But on the 20th of March, this article written by Maria Pavlova was released. It has a very interesting, I think it was a faux pas on the part of the Russian MOD. So, just for people, the Ministry of Defense reported that Russian troops are completing the defeat of the Nationalist Battalions Donbass. Again, forgive the translation. The grammar isn't going to be the best, and I'm sure people who followed my Telegram for a while will understand. I'm basically dyslexic. I can barely write English, let alone any other language. So Russian MOD, it's just basically a quick update on the progress of the Russian quote-unquote special operations in Donbass. So for people who aren't aware, this guy, this particular general, he is the one who does the briefing, the daily briefing for the Russian military and what they allege the Russian military has destroyed and taken for each day's combat operations in Ukraine. So Ministry of Defense, official briefing, Igor Konashevnikov, forgive my pronunciation. I'm again, I can barely speak English, let alone pronounce another language. So this is all just kind of sort of generic kind of daily briefing stuff, but it comes down to a very interesting admission down roundabout starting. Yes, so we will start. This is where I think the interesting part that is relevant comes in here. So, I could pick up my own women on dating sites really without complexes. Find myself a Russian girlfriend without a neurological disorder. According to official representative of the Ministry of Defense on Sunday, March 20th, 89 Ukrainian military facilities were hit. This is just kind of generic, but according to preliminary estimates of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, so this is what the Ukrainians are claiming. Preliminary estimate From the beginning of the special military operations in Ukraine, Russian armed forces lost 96 aircraft, 118 helicopters, and 14.7 thousand military. So this article is alleging, and what the Russian MOD seems to be saying is this is what the Ukrainians are officially alleging, is that 14,700 Russian troops have been killed in Ukraine. I've seen other things where the Ukrainians have claimed 17,000 and the like. I've always felt that was kind of high, but in hindsight, I think there's a bit of nuance that actually I might have been missing, and I think other people have been missing about this claim. So this video is basically going to go into why I think the Ukrainians might actually be a bit more accurate than I was. Not in terms of this. I do not believe that 96 Russian fixed-wing aircraft and 118 helicopters have been shot down. I think that's far too high. There's not enough footage for me to. There's not enough footage going about out there to corroborate that kind of aircraft losses. But this, in a bit more nuanced way, I actually think maybe the Ukrainians might be a bit more accurate than I was willing to admit. So this is where I think is the very interesting thing. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation refutes the information. So the Russian MOD says the Ukrainian figure is wrong. Of the Ukrainian General Staff about allegedly large-scale losses of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine, according to the Ministry of Defense. So I think this was a faux pas. I think this briefing that the MOD gave to this journalist, I think they either didn't mean to admit this or they did, but this journalist wasn't meant to put this into the article, because the current version of this article, I'll go onto the website and have a look at it, this has been omitted. So according to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, during the special operations in Ukraine, the Russian armed forces lost 9,861 people killed, 16,153 injured. So people who follow the Telegram channel, I've always maintained for basically around about the past week and a half, if there was more than 10,000 Russian killed or seriously injured, I would seriously injured basically being essentially their battlefield ineffective. They can no longer fight. I've always said that more than 10,000 would sound quite high to me. So that kind of validated what I was initially thinking. But I'm kind of going back to reassess on because of some other factors that I just wasn't considering. This I'm not too sure about. I don't know what the Russians considered injured. Is this injured to the point where these troops are basically they're completely battlefield ineffective? They will never walk again. They will never be able to fight again. Or is this soldiers being shot in the leg? Give it a few weeks, give it a couple months, he might be able to return to action. I'm not too sure what they class as injured. So earlier it was reported during the Captain First Rank Deputy Commander Andrei Palais was killed in Mariupol. And yeah, so basically this is a short, quick update article on the progress of the war and a briefing from the Russian MOD from Maria Pavlova. So now let's have a quick look if this will just take us to the amended version of this article. So this is on the website, as you can see. This is the archive. This is now on the live website. Yep, see, you notice that this is a substantially shorter article, the current live version, and it effectively completely omits the part about Russian casualties. So my hypothesis is that basically maybe the Russian MOD told this journalist a bit too much, more than they were willing to, or they didn't expect this journalist to actually put this in the internet article. She has, for whatever reason, either the MOD complained, maybe someone from the government complained, maybe the editor said, no, we're not publishing that, that could get us into trouble, and they've removed this particular paragraph. Also, you notice the talk about the deputy commander of the Black Sea Fleet, that was removed. So the article has been substantially shortened. So that's the first thing. So I'm willing to, on that basis, I'm willing to believe that this is a sort of baseline figure. I'm willing to believe that as far as the Russian MOD is concerned, this is what they actually believe their casualties are. So the Russians admitted it, even by accident. I'm willing to use that as sort of a baseline figure going forward. But there's a big but here. There's a lot of nuances. I actually think this is. I actually think that this might even be a more accurate figure for just in general, not necessarily Russian, but Russian aligned losses in totality of the war. So what do I mean by this? So the Russian MOD, it controls the army, the air force, the navy. It's the Ministry of Defense. So all the armed branches that come under the purview of the Ministry of Defense. That's what I think they're accounting for. So every soldier, sailor, airman, anyone who is a conscript or whatever, if they're part of one of the armed branches that are part of the Russian military, they're included in this figure. That's what this is where I'm thinking the discrepancy could come in here. What is not included in this figure are going to be the soldiers from Luhansk and Donetsk, because although they will work very closely with the Russian army, they're not part of the Russian army. So one, obviously, it's politically expedient for the Russians to put out the presentation that their losses are as low as possible. So again, if allies are taking losses, allied forces who are fighting with you but are not actually part of your military, don't count them. So that doesn't include the Luhansk and Donetsk fighters. And I am also willing to believe that Kadyrov's Chechens, the Kadyrovites, and Kadyrov's personal army, I am willing to believe that they are not included in those figures as well. Because without going into the particular nuances of Chechnya, and I will not make the bones of pretending I understand it myself. So there are Chechens who are part of the regular Russian army. They sign up for contracts. They join the regular Russian army. They're counted as if they've been killed, they will be. I'm willing to believe they'd be counted in that figure. But because Chechnya, its unique position in the Russian Federation, it has massive amounts of autonomy. If anything, it's one degree of separation from being an independent state, kind of because of the unique history of the Chechen Wars and the way the Russians eventually pacified the region. Is they gave Kadyrov and the Chechens sweeping autonomy, essentially apart from foreign affairs, maybe some elements of federal security services, financial policies regarding to the ruble, and national defense in terms of the standing military, as in the thing that come under the purview of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Everything apart from those above is, from my understanding, is basically Kadyrov runs them in-house in Chechnya. So there's massive autonomy there. Kadyrov has a large personal army. The Kadyrovites, the Kadyrovskis, or not pronouncing it correctly, but you get the idea. And I'm sure if you've been in my channel, you'll have noticed that Kadyrov has made a big scene about recruiting, sending his personal militias to Ukraine to fight in Ukraine. And especially in the opening stages of the war, it seems that there was quite a big battle between some of Kadyrov's men and the Ukrainians in northern Kiev, and quite a few of them ended up being killed. So, because they are essentially Kadyrov's personal army, they're not paid, they're not trained, they're not equipped, they don't come under the purview of the Russian armed forces. So their losses are not going to be included within this figure. So I wouldn't even know where to begin estimating how many have been killed that could be added to that figure. But this is where I'm trying to parcel out the nuance about this casualty figure. So that's not to say they're completely independent forces. You can bet that I'm sure Kadyrov kind of sent these militias just arbitrarily into Ukraine by and large. They've turned up and they've been to the Russians have told them what to do. Maybe some of them have gone there and basically decided they're going to start trying to conduct their own independent operations, but they will ultimately in some form or another come under Russian command, but they're not part of the Russian armed forces. And then another factor that would come on top of this is the Russian internal troops, the Omhon, that's how I would pronounce it, the OMON, the Russian internal troops, that specific group, the OMON, Sort of, if you've ever been to France, you'll know the difference between the Police Nationale and the Gendarmerie. The OMOH is kind of like the Russian version of the Gendarmerie, but in a radically more militarized form. So these are people who will deal with riots in areas such as the Caucasus whenever there's sort of low level insurgencies. These are usually the troops that would actually engage in the fighting of it. Essentially, these are not soldiers in the traditional sense of the word. These are like very militarized auxiliary police, but they're essentially sort of like their own army in a way, especially with the way they're equipped. They have been significantly deployed to Ukraine. Alongside that, you've also got some parts of the Sobor and various other specialized units of the internal troops. But being internal troops, they don't come under the Russian Ministry of Defense, so they're not classed as part of the Russian armed forces. They come under the Ministry of the Interior, which obviously would cover things like the militia, which is the police, and the prisons, and just general law enforcement. So they've been deployed to Ukraine to free up the Russian army, the Russian armed forces, by essentially trying to suppress any local Ukrainian opposition. So I'm willing to bet as well, internal troops are not coming under this figure, and there has been a couple. I've seen some footage, especially today, of Russian internal troops, OMOH, OMHON troops, especially columns that have been destroyed. So they have taken losses. So that's another area why I think the Russians could be, although they're not publicly, they announced this publicly by accident, but I think this is whenever the war is over, this is how the Russians might try and keep the official casualty lists as low as possible. And the other group that I think, and apologize, I am going to have to go to Wikipedia here, but don't worry, I'm not actually going to be reading anything off Wikipedia. It's just for just to demonstrate something. There is a third large faction which does not come under the Ministry of the Interior or Russian MOD, which is the National Guard of Russia. This does not answer to the Russian Ministry of Defense, does not answer to the Interior Ministry. It answers specifically to the Security of Council of Russia. And what this group is, it sort of acts as another gendarmerie, because Russia, the USSR, and even back to the Russian Empire, they had various different levels and groups of internal troops to police different segments of the country, different populaces within the country, and this tradition is sort of carried on. So this group, to a degree, as you can see here, they some people accuse this group, the National Guard of Russia, as kind of being a private army for Putin. Whatever politics aside, either way, this is its own independent quasi-military policing force. This has been heavily deployed to Ukraine. Whenever you see the footage of the protests in Kherson and Mariupol and stuff like that, these are the troops who, by and large, are the ones who are guarding it. So these are not combat troops. They are militarized, so they can fight in combat if needs be, but they're not dedicated soldiers. Again, they're sort of a step above a gendarme. So if I wouldn't really know. Essentially, if there's a case of mass scale disorder within Russia, these guys will be deployed. If there's a war abroad, these troops will be deployed as sort of like an auxiliary force for the Russian military to free up Russian soldiers to continue the fight on the front, while these troops and the internal troops will contain any civilian populations that might cause problems for any Russian operations. So I am willing to bet, because these guys do not answer to the Russian MOD or the Russian Interior Minister, I am willing to believe that any losses that they incur will also not be included in this figure. So this specific figure, as it says here, this only includes the losses of the Russian armed forces. So this Ukrainian suggestion, I don't know if it'd be too high, I don't know if it'd be too low, but this to me would seem like a more accurate figure for, in total, aggregate losses of Russian aligned forces. That's including Russia, the Allied republics, and Chechens. So that is the nuance that I think I kind of wanted to spurg out at you people in a manic way, like I usually do. So that is something that I would be considering going forward. Is whenever Russia releases casualty figures, take very particular note of how it is worded. See what the casualty figures are said for. In terms of Ukrainian casualty figures, Ukraine hasn't, to my knowledge, really released some. I believe they released some a week ago, but it was far too low for what I would estimate. My guesstimate for this is Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian territorial defense. I'm not including civilians in this. And I know there would be a bit of a nuance between demarcating what between a civilian and the territorial defense militias, but either way, just take this for what it's worth. Is I would estimate total Ukrainian combat deaths to be somewhere between maybe 6,500 to around about maybe 8-9,000. And that's just a guesstimate on my part. But why am I saying that? In warfare, the advantage in casualties always sides with the defense. Because if you just think about the nature of warfare, if you're attacking something, you're the one putting yourself out in the open. You're the one who has to make the moves to put yourself in danger to take that physical position from the person defending. Person defending generally will know the terrain that they're defending. They'll know their way around it. They'll be dug in. They'll have time to prepare, which the Ukrainians have. And also, it is the Ukrainian national homeland this war is taking part on. So Ukrainians have that particular bit of motivation, a particular bit of local knowledge as well. So generally, as I say, in warfare, I believe the proportion is if you're going to attack something, generally have 3 times as many troops on your side as the defending force. If not that, if you have a massive technological advantage, for example, in certain cases like the United States had in Vietnam or the coalition had in Iraq and Afghanistan, you're fighting a significantly less technologically sophisticated force like the Taliban or the Iraqi military was in Desert Storm, Second Gulf War, or in Afghanistan, you can negate that inbuilt defender's advantage. But that isn't the case in Ukraine, because Ukraine isn't a third world nation. It has a fairly sophisticated military, a very reasonably well equipped military, fairly well trained, and they're especially motivated. So that's why I am willing to believe that the Ukrainians have suffered less combat deaths than the Russians have so far. But also, the other nuance that I want to put into this is I believe the majority, say this, just take, for example, well, either way, take both these figures. It doesn't really matter which one you take, either or. I'm willing to believe that the majority of the deaths within these figures will have been suffered by the Russians within the first week or the first and a half weeks. If there's sort of like a quote unquote bell curve of deaths, is I believe is it bring up MS Paint, but let's say up here, just hypothesize there's a line graph here. So Russian deaths will have gone up, start of the invasion, gone up to about here. Then as the war goes on, is I believe that the deaths will have gone down. They'll still stay high, and then they'll reach an equilibrium as the war goes on, but they'll have decreased. Why am I saying that? Because the Russians acted very incompetently in the first week of the invasion. Got a lot of, especially conscripts, got themselves killed or captured. The Russians didn't apply their doctrines properly. The Russians had the wrong assumptions of what resistance they would meet in Ukraine. So I'm willing to believe that essentially most of the Russian casualties were suffered within the first days, the first week and a half. Since then, the Russians have been learning on the job, and this is a point I keep trying to readdress and reinforce. Russian commanders and Russian soldiers themselves seem to be learning quite decently on the job. They're getting better at what they do in certain places. There's still areas where I think they could do a lot better, but big things, drones, see more evidence of the Russians applying their tactics and their doctrines on a squad level, on a company level. They're fighting better. They're not just advancing headlong into enemy territory with no screens, although that still happens occasionally. But yeah, so the Russians are learning to fight better. They're learning to mobilize better, to how to operate better. So, in just as a result of that, I'm willing to believe the Russian casualty rate I know it's counterintuitive. The longer the war goes on, the less casualties will be killed. But yeah, essentially, as the Russians become more adept at this, unless the Ukrainians are able to really throw a spanner into the works, I'm willing to believe that the Russian casualty rate is declining over time. But obviously, in war, there will always be deaths going on in war. In terms of the Ukrainian side, yeah, I would imagine that there was probably a massive spike. Well, obviously, if the war just started, that's whenever people start dying. But I would say the same to a degree with the Ukrainians. Whenever the Ukrainians tried to put up their conventional resistance, whenever they tried to fight in their tanks with their heavy vehicles, that's where the Russians are strongest. So all these columns that we've seen in the first couple of days, that's where I'm willing to believe that probably quite a lot, if not maybe a majority of the Ukrainian casualties of my hypothesized 6 to 8, 9,000 Ukrainian dead. I'm willing to believe that's where the majority of them came. This sort of fumbling in the first few days of the war is both sides tried to figure out how to fight the war. And then obviously a lot of people died while they were trying to learn this as well. And then obviously as time goes on, the Russians, like the barracks that was hit the other day in Nikolaev, I believe upwards potentially 200 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed there. So yeah, there'll be big spikes here and there. So in a hypothetical bar line chart, they'll the Ukrainian war starts, Ukrainians go up, their heavy equipment gets completely destroyed. They can't really fight the conventional warfare because that's where the Russian strength. So their tanks get wheedled out, their heavy equipment gets wheedled out, so they go to a more infantry based force. So once that happens, this transition of the Ukrainians from a conventional mechanized armored based force to a more infantry based force, that's harder to pin down. So there'll be less uh, casualties on the Ukrainian side. That's not to say that this is going to stay forever, because obviously in Mariupol, whenever there's big city battles, they're very bloody. That's whenever lots of troops get in close with each other. That's where it gets bloodied. But apart from Mariupol, in some of the suburbs of Kiev, we're not seeing that very heavy, close house to house fighting where lots of casualties are generated. It's kind of ambushes. To a degree, there is quite sustained fighting in places of the Donbass, but again, going back to this issue here, I think most of those casualties will probably be borne by the Lugansk and the Donetsk fighters as opposed to the Russians themselves. But most of the fighting seems to be ambushes, sort of toe to toe across fields, village to village kind of artillery duels, things like that. And that usually, well, the ambushes can be quite spectacular, but that sort of warfare doesn't, it's not a massive pitched battle in a city which would generate hundreds and potentially thousands of casualties like Mariupol probably is going to end up resulting in. So that's the nuances that I was looking to spurg out at you, chat, in regards to the casualty figures and how to assess them when and if they do come out, as they have inadvertently here by the Russians, at least for their military, their armed forces. So, and then I guess the other thing I would wish to bring up is there. I think someone posted in chat in the group in fact, let me bring it up. No, I bring up the stream. I believe someone in chat might have posted some new footage about a particular favorite topic of mine. Oh, was this today? Yes, this was today. I share it. I don't think I shared it. So, for people who aren't aware, I have been keeping a very close eye on the quote unquote theater bombing that happened in Mariupol. I've dealt with it, I've mentioned it in the previous stream, so I'm not going to go too in depth on it, but there was a bit more footage that came out today which showed a bit more. I can't see this. Someone did post it somewhere, but I appear to have lost it. But it did look like there was a bit. Quote, the building was still smoking, so it was relatively soon after the theater was hit. But there was a bit of activity around it. But again, we're what? When was the theater bombed? About 4 days ago, 5 days ago. and we are still essentially bereft of any serious significant footage, images, or reports about it, which I find very strange indeed. So the theater, the claim that I've seen the BBC and the CNN make is that there has been no rescue operations can be held in the area because there's fighting nearby. In the footage I have seen of the theater that came out right after it, in the day or two after the bombing, you could not hear fighting nearby. So if I could just find a recent map of Mariupol and see if we can ascertain a general location of where battle lines in the city are. This is where speaking Cyrillic reading Cyrillic would really be a hand. Okay, I'm gonna have to wing this. So from my understanding, this is just going to be a guesstimate, so don't take this as a heartfelt, but this is the Avostol industrial metallurgical plant. So this is where Azov is reported to have their stronghold. This is I'm assuming it would be this area here. If people were in the Telegram, that's where I believe the Buratino rocket strike came into. I believe this is the sort of area where those rockets came in that footage that I posted earlier. But this is all held by the DNR. I believe pretty much a line that goes somewhat around about there is essentially everything within this sort of semicircle kind of pattern is still held by Azov, still held by Ukraine. So while I'm rambling, if I can find a map, I'll bring it up just to corroborate what I'm saying. So essentially what I've seen is, I believe, if anyone remembers the tank incident where I showed the footage of the 2 tanks that were hit by Ukrainian RPGs, and I made the comment where we were talking about why certain bodies might not be able to return to Russia because they'll be destroyed in tanks. That specific footage I showed for that, I believe that was around here. So I believe, if you know of the footage I'm talking about, yeah, I believe the tanks came up here, somewhere around here. This is that building. So tank was hit by an RPG here, and then the driver who got out, he died, or he tried to climb away somewhere around here, just to give you an idea of where some of the footage I've posted is from. So around here is where the tank footage came from. Down that avenue, this is the theater. So as you can see, that isn't too far away. That is maybe a 5-minute walk. So the city, Mariupol, is actually quite a small city in hindsight. It is actually a fairly small city. You could walk across the entire thing and probably, depending how fast you walk, yeah, you could probably walk that in about an hour or so, maybe a bit longer. But the front lines that I last seen were somewhere around about here. So it is relatively close to the theater, but there doesn't seem to actually be any fighting in the footage that I've seen of the theater. So just to give you an idea of where we're looking at. So this is the theater here. This is the metallurgical plant. The Russians, from the last map that I remember looking at, they were around about here. So they are very close to the theater. They could have taken the area of the theater now, potentially. But so depending on what figure you believe, 3,800, whatever, Ukrainian troops still in the city, they do have a relatively small area in which to hold. And these bridges are still running. If these bridges have been destroyed, that bisects the Azov stronghold from the city proper. So that's the 2 rambling points I wish to make about the theater, and just to sort of give you a general outline of the situation in Mariupol. And like I said, just to, I do feel like I'm kind of winging this, which isn't fair on you guys. I am going to look for an actual map of Mariupol just to see if I am completely off, or where is the Colonel Kassad? He's usually good for this stuff. In fact, look, I'll just Google, I'll just have a look in the Telegram for the Cyrillic spelling. map on one of these groups. The Russian spelling, Russian speaker. Look. The I apologize. I'm sure this is a excruciating follow chat. Why? Apparently, the way Wikipedia spells Mariupol is not the way that the Russians in Telegram spell it. So, find how they spell it actually in the chat. What am I doing? There is a specific page dedicated to a specific pro-Ukrainian channel. It's dedicated to Mariupol, but I haven't seen. Here we go. Let's have post in chat. Okay, yeah, here we go, here we go. Well, it's not a map as such, but I have found. So this is some footage that's come out of the theater. So this was recently after the bombing. How do you know that? Because there's fire and there's smoke. So this is in the few hours of bombing. So, so there are people here, but for what is potentially 1,000 people, 800 people trapped in the basement of the theater, there is not a lot of energy amongst these people. There's a police car there, so if you just pick that up, there is a first responder vehicle there, so there is some kind of first response in Mariupol, at least the time the theater was bombed, so there's the police car. But as I say, the general demeanor of these people kind of tell me that what we are being told is not what has happened in reality, because if there is alleged to be 800 people under there, 1,000 people, I mean, I would imagine if they're still alive, if they were out there to begin with, is you would hear them, or these people would be more frantic than what they are, because these people are just kind of walking around it, just kind of taking in the sight. This is my perception of it, so take that as a grain of salt. But these people are just kind of like I say, this is a spectacular scene. They're here just to observe the damage. They're not particularly concerned about, or don't seem to be concerned about, any potential people actually still inside the building itself. So I am of the mindset that essentially this is the game plan I'm going forward with so far. I don't know if the Russians did it, if Azov blew it up. I can't comment one way or the other, but I do believe that any civilians within the shelter were not in. I believe that they were evacuated by the time that the building was destroyed, however it was destroyed. So that is the running game theory I am running with at the moment. So that, just to square that up. Now let me see if I can find. These guys are usually very good at posting maps. So, oh yeah. So this is the footage I was talking about. So this is the Buratino. So these are thermobaric. That buzzword thermo. I'm sorry, it's not showing up too big, but the video is in the channel. These are thermobaric warheads fired by the TOS Buratino. So this is obviously the video is being slowed down, but this is why these explosions look almost surreal, almost CGI like, because these are the thermobaric warheads exploding. So this is in the Avostal metallurgical plant, and as I was saying, I believe that footage is of this area here. So just to give you an idea of what's happening in and around the city, as I try and find these guys are Usually they're usually pretty good at posting map updates at the end of the day, especially in regards to Mariupol. Okay, here we go. Right, so we'll take this. So just to give you an idea, as you can see, well, this is actually saying that pretty much most of the Avostal plant has been taken already. So when was this? This was, yeah, this is today slash yesterday. So that theater, as I say, that theater is in and around there. So there you go. That's the theater there. Just to try and zoom out so you can have a bit of idea whenever I bring this map back up. So in and around there's the theater. So this advance, whatever is happening here, that's pretty much on the theater. So I believe that's the theater there, if I'm in the map correctly. So the theater, for all intents and purposes, could be under Russian control potentially. So it'll be interesting to see what the Russians say about the scene whenever they actually get there, and you can bet that the Russians and the DNR will film the scene. But as you can see, this is the sort of outline of the battle. Pretty much the entire east of Mariupol has fallen. Russians are pushing quite aggressively into the west. They're essentially bisecting the city. So as you can see, that advance there is going for these two bridges. So if these bridges are still standing, pardon me, these bridges are still standing across this river, across the river Kalminus, then whatever remains of Azov in the Avostal factory district, going by that map again, how accurate this map is another question, but it seems to imply this part, which would make sense considering this is where the Buratinos hit. But if that bridge is still standing and this Russian push down along this area takes it, then yeah, that's Azov's stronghold here, pretty much in its own little pocket, which will wither on the vine, and it'll be the north and south of Mariupol will then become two separate pockets. So there'll be Mariupol will be trisected in the three. Then from there on out, it's just going to be mopping up essentially for the Russians. I do have to correct myself. I usually do this, and it usually proves me wrong. The Russians always keep correcting me whenever I try to give them a bone. I had expected essentially the entire city to fall by Sunday. We are now, well, UK time, we are just going into Tuesday. So the longer the Ukrainians hold out, probably the better. That's why they refused the offer to surrender. I am running with the hypothesis is the longer the Russians can continue to be engaged here, is remember what I was saying in the channel about the weather. It is mud season, but in most of Ukraine there hasn't been a lot of rain or snow. And in fact, let's have a quick look at the weather map and see what forecast for Ukraine is. Oh. So as you can see, obviously the blue and the green is rain, potentially snow. There is none of it over Ukraine. There's none of it over Eastern Europe. Um, I believe in this part, I believe generally the weather comes down from Siberia. I don't think it comes in from the west. Looking at the way these winds go, but as you can see, there is no precipitation, and this to me says that there isn't going to be for potentially another week. So there, I'm sure there's probably been localized snow and rain in and around parts of Ukraine, but in general there hasn't. So accumulation. Is there a way to pick up a right? Let's go for the Friday. Okay, there you go. So Friday, there's predicted to be some pockets of snow across central Ukraine into Crimea, but this isn't really a battle area. This isn't really a battle area as well, because all down here is held by the Russians. The Russians aren't going to take Dnipro anytime soon. So that's Friday. Thursday, there's to be we're done. I don't know why I've gone to the South Pacific there, but doing that. So, well, yesterday was Monday, nothing. Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday, nothing. Friday, nothing. Although I think this is okay. That's fog. Friday, we start to get stuff, and then it doesn't really give us much for Saturday and Sunday. But this would probably be the openings of rain and snow in Ukraine. So we've had round about a week of no rain or snow in Ukraine. So the ground, it wouldn't be dry, but it's not sodden. So you could still potentially move vehicles in tanks, especially tanks across it. So up until Friday, like I say, I don't really think this is going to be really impactful on any combat operations. But potentially from Saturday onwards, rain comes in, especially in the area of the Donbass here. So Volonovka, that city fell to the DNR the other day. So you've got a Ukrainian defensive line somewhere along here. The Russians are able to wrap up Mariupol. I think the weather map has kind of brought us as much as we can. So let's have a look here. So this is Mariupol down here. If the Russians are able to tie that up, finish the battle, secure the city, they can redeploy themselves, the Donetsk and the Chechens that are in the city, up the southern flank of the Donbass and start to push up and try and make gains and potentially this advance here out of the Kharkov area. Maybe they're looking to eventually link up, but either way, there's a time window on this. So the longer the Ukrainians can bog down the Russians, the Ukrainians can bog down the Russians in Mariupol, is less time that the Russians are able to have this reasonably good weather, these reasonably good conditions to redeploy their forces, their tanks, and begin a new offensive into the Donbass. Because once the rains really start to hit all this cross country, it's just not going to be feasible to really do large scale military maneuvers because tanks will sink in the mud and vehicles will get trapped in. Yeah, it's a big point I've been constantly pressing is mud season. Mud season has started, but the Russians have gotten a bit of breathing room by the fact that the spring rains haven't come. So the ground isn't sodden. So it's still they still have a room to maneuver, potentially pull off some more advances. So that's I would say the strategic consideration why the Ukrainians just rejected out of hand any surrender in Mariupol. They're looking to hold on as long as possible. So for every life lost, every Ukrainian in Azov life lost in Mariupol, the big aspect is, yeah, obviously how much damage it can do to the Russians, but namely how much time they can buy till the weather comes in I wouldn't say saves, but really comes to the benefit of the Ukrainian position in the Donbass because it is. I've said this since the first week, but it is collapsing, but it's collapsing far slower than I expected. But as you can see, up here in Severodonetsk, the Lugansk militia just advanced fast into open country, outflanked the Ukrainians. They're coming round to meet up with these troops coming down from Bukovelia, I believe it's pronounced, and Izium. So they've probably already met and linked up already. So this is the Kharkov battle group coming down here. They pull down most Ukrainian troops. They'll obviously try and redeploy stuff to try and hold here, but every troop, every unit, they have to pull off this front line. That's more pressure being applied into it. That weakens it, but they're going to have to pull troops off here to redeploy along here to try and hold off the Russian advance here and the Lugansk flanking maneuver here. So if the Russians can pull up troops here and start to push up here, all this because there is a lot of Ukrainian equipment and soldiers inside this castle here. If the Russians can pocket that and encircle it in overtime, just essentially annihilate it, that would be a very significant loss to the Ukrainian army. A very, very heavy loss in terms of manpower and equipment. So this is the big area to watch over the next week because this is where I expect the Russians are going to be making their biggest play. If they are going to make a play, is here. There might be a play towards Kivarog. So just to give you an idea of these strange names if you're not familiar with. So Kherson, the big city the Russians have, that's where the airport where the Ukrainians did the artillery shell attack on the Russian helicopters, they were based here, but this is Kherson. So that's Nikolaev. So it appears the Ukrainians did a small counterattack and took over. It was one of these two villages, but either way, the Ukrainians are largely pocketed in and around Nikolaev. But the Russians, from what I've seen, they're advancing bypassing, so they're advancing somewhere up in this direction, looking to cross the Bug, namely the Bug River. Uh, that must be the Ukrainian name for it. I just know it is the Bug. So this is the Bug River. This is the big thing that's blocking the Russians from advancing further to the west, potentially to the borders of Pridnestrovia and Odessa. I it's I see how Google has just put all these names in Ukrainian, whereas I really know them by the Russian names. But so Nikolaev, Mykolaiv. So that's that's a place where the Russians might try and make an advance. Also, quite interestingly, is the governor of Kivirog, and I'm not too sure if the oblast. Okay, it's Dnipro. It'll be Dnipro. I think that's a bit dated. I think they changed the name of the oblast as well. So Dnipro Oblast has confirmed that essentially Russian lead units have started to appear somewhere around about along these villages to the south of Kivrog. So before an airfield, like a military, yeah, military airfield, that looks disused. Yeah, that's disused. So, well, this is just a little autistic point. Just for people who are into looking at maps and stuff, how can you tell that this is a military airfield, or was? You can tell it because this is where this would have been a Soviet era airfield. These are where you would have put the military aircraft. These banks around it are to shield the aircraft if there was explosions nearby it. But how can you tell it is disused? Just look at, oh, this is going to be grass, flora growing up between the pavements. So this is not an active airfield. But so is there actually an active airfield nearby? Not too sure if there is any Ukrainian military bases near Kivarog, but as you can see, it's a sizable enough city, but it's not a massive city, but the Russians are approaching it. So this could be another area where the Russians try and take before the rain seasons come. If they can try and take here, consolidate their position, wrap up this whole bridgehead they have to the west of the Dnieper, that would be a fairly good place to take and hold, as especially as rain seasons come in. It's going to be potentially a month and a half, 2 months. They are going to have to sit tight, and this would be a fairly good place to consolidate and build up your power in those 2 months. Is wait for better weather to come. And finally, the other place to keep, well, I do not expect anything to happen in Kiev. The battle group out of Chernigov, my understanding, it still hasn't met up with the Russian leaded elements around Borovny. So I'm not expecting, maybe small advances to the west, but I'm not expecting much a big play from the Russians over the next week around Kiev. I think they really need to sort out Chernigov and Sumy and to a degree Kharkov. So now there was some interesting footage that came out the other day with a lot of heavy trucks, tank loaders in Melitopol. Again, if you look through the channel, you'll see the footage of it. Significant logistics convoy, Russian logistics convoy, was sighted the other day moving at night through Melitopol. I wouldn't be surprised if that's heading up to Tomak to this sort of direction. So we could potentially see, pardon me, the Russians in the south. The Z Force could try and get a bit more momentum in this week at least of decent weather to try and make a play either towards Zaporozhye, but I wouldn't expect them to try and take the city, or they could push just straight up or into the rear. Because don't forget, looking at the wider map, there's Mariupol, there's Donetsk, so all those Ukrainian troops are based in around here. So if the Russians try and make an advance out of this direction towards there, they could try and come into the rear and throw even more confusion and disorder into the Ukrainian army units in the Donbass. Because don't forget, you also have this battle group coming down out of Izium. So for those who aren't aware, because the Russians just are having too much problems in Kharkov, they're essentially bypassing the city. They pushed down this road here. They took Bakalea. They've come into Izium. There's Severodonetsk. If you bring up this map, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, that's Severodonetsk there. As you can see, it's pretty much encircled by three sides. That's Izium up there. So Luhansk and the Russian army are going to meet up here, push into the rear of Kramatorsk, push up from the south from Mariupol. You get a group if you get a push, and don't forget it's the southern, it's these troops out of here which are the most effective and efficient Russian military units. They push out of Tomak, straight up here. They could potentially try and cut any retreat that the Ukrainians might be able to effect out of the Donbass, the emerging Donbass pocket. So that's another area to keep an eye on, is if this group out of Tomak and Melitopol, it tries and pushes up quite aggressively to block any retreat of Ukrainian troops and material out of the Donbass area. So